All right, we're going to try something pretty ambitious today. We are going to cover the entire story of the Bible. I mean, from page 1, Genesis, all the way to the very end. Let's do this. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Thousands of years of history in just a few minutes? Is that even possible? Well, it's a huge story for sure. But we're going to hit the major plot points, the moments that connect this epic narrative from beginning to end. So let's dive right in. So, of course, we have to start at the very beginning. In the time before time, there's God, and he speaks, and the universe comes into being, the heavens, the earth, all of it. And on the sixth day, he creates humanity, Adam and Eve, in his own image. And at first, life was absolutely perfect, a direct, open, unbroken relationship with the Creator. But when humanity chose to go their own way, to break the one rule they were given, that perfect connection was shattered. Sin entered the world, and it created a separation. A gap between God and humanity that would define the rest of history. And boy, did things spiral out of control fast. Sin wasn't just a one-time mistake. It spread like a disease. It led to the very first murder, Cain killing his own brother Abel. And soon, the entire world was just filled with violence. It got so bad, God decided it was time for a hard reset. But God finds one man, Noah, who's still living right. And through him and his family, humanity is saved. Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their wives survive a massive flood on the ark. And it's from these 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, that the entire earth is repopulated, forming the nations of the ancient world. Okay, so after this global reset, God's plan kind of zooms in. Instead of working with all of humanity at once, he focuses his incredible plan of rescue on one specific family line. And that whole plan kicks off with a man named Abraham. God calls him and makes him a huge promise. I will make you the father of a great nation, and through your family, one day, the whole world will be blessed. This promise, this covenant, is passed down to his son Isaac, and then to his grandson Jacob, whose name gets changed to Israel. Now, through a whole dramatic series of events with his son Joseph, Jacob's entire family ends up moving to Egypt. They do really well there, and get this, over 400 years, a family of just 70 people explodes into a nation of millions. But a new pharaoh takes over, who turns them from guests into slaves, and that begins 4 centuries of just brutal bondage. That's when God raises up a leader, Moses, to bring his people out. Almost 2 million people escape slavery, heading for a promised land, but a journey that should have taken a few weeks turns into a 40-year trek through the desert. Why? Because when they got to the edge of the land, they sent in spies, and only 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, actually trusted God to give them the victory. The rest were terrified, and because of that disbelief, that whole generation had to wander until they died in the wilderness. So, with Joshua leading them, the next generation finally makes it into the promised land. For years, they're led by these figures called judges. But then, the people start looking around at other nations, and they decide, hey, we want what they have. We want a king. And right here, we see this really crucial pattern start to form. For 120 years, they have one united kingdom under 3 kings. Saul starts off with so much promise, but he ends in rebellion. He's followed by David, the shepherd king, a man after God's own heart. Then comes his son Solomon, who's blessed with incredible wisdom and builds the great temple. But even the wisest man in the world is eventually led away into worshiping other gods, setting the stage for total disaster. Yeah, Solomon's choices lead to a civil war after he dies, and the kingdom splits right in 2. And just look at the difference here. The northern kingdom, called Israel, just cycles through 19 kings, and not a single one is considered a good king, before they're completely wiped out by the Assyrians. The southern kingdom, Judah, lasts a bit longer. They have a few good kings here and there, but in the end, they fall into the same pattern and are conquered by Babylon. Now, through all this decline, God never went silent. He kept sending prophets, these powerful voices like Elijah, Isaiah, and Jeremiah. Their job was to warn both kingdoms, to call them to turn back to him. But for the most part, the people just didn't listen, and they had to face the consequences of being sent into exile. So after the exile and a partial return to the land, we enter a whole new phase. This is it. This is the central moment, the pivot point that the entire story has been building towards, the arrival of the promised Messiah. But first, there's this stretch of 400 years of what people call prophetic silence. For 4 centuries, there are no new recorded messages from God. During this time, empires rise and fall, and when the story picks up again, Israel is living under the iron fist of the Roman Empire. And into this world, Jesus is born. At 30 years old, he begins his public ministry, and it starts with a bang. At his baptism, for the first time in centuries, the very voice of God booms from heaven, declaring, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." The silence is officially broken. For the next 3 years, Jesus' actions are just as powerful as his words. The miracles are unbelievable. He heals the sick, he feeds thousands of people with a tiny bit of food, he gives sight to the blind, and he even raises the dead. He's demonstrating his authority over creation itself. And all of this is pointing to the central claim of the whole story. Jesus wasn't just another prophet. He was called Emmanuel, which literally means God with us. The claim is that the creator of the universe had come in human form to live among the people he created. But his ultimate mission was to finally deal with that sin problem from way back in the garden. He came to die on a cross, to take the penalty for all of humanity's sin on himself. But here's the kicker: death couldn't hold him. On the third day, he rose from the grave, conquering death and making a way for that broken relationship with God to finally be restored. After Jesus ascends back to heaven, the story doesn't just end, it explodes. This is the birth of the church, and it's fueled by the spread of his message, the gospel, which simply means good news. This whole movement ignites in Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost, when God's Spirit comes and empowers all the believers. From there, the message just ripples outward, just like you see here. And ironically, the very thing that helps it spread so fast is persecution. It forces the believers to scatter from Jerusalem, and they take the message with them wherever they go. And you have these key figures who lead the charge. Peter is leading the early church in Jerusalem. Philip takes the message out to the Samaritans. But the most shocking and effective convert of all is a man named Saul, who becomes the Apostle Paul. This guy goes from being the church's biggest enemy to its greatest missionary, traveling all over the Roman Empire planting churches. You know, the book of Acts, which tells this story of the early church, has a funny ending. It doesn't really have one. It just kind of stops. And that's the point. The story wasn't over. The work that started way back then is understood to be continuing, generation after generation, right up until today. And so the whole story comes full circle. It begins with humanity separated from God in a garden, and it ends with an open invitation for absolutely anyone to be reconnected with him. It's one giant, epic narrative about restoring a broken conversation, and it leaves us all with one final thought. This whole story is about God reaching out. What might change if we choose to answer?